Hi guys, it's Ariana. Welcome back to my channel. So for tonight's video, I did dress up as Wednesday Addams from the Addams Family for this spooky video because I'm going to be reading some more scary stories with you guys, and I'm super excited. So I'm hoping that I can get through this to be about 30 minutes, but I'm already really warm because this outfit that I got from Shein is like incredibly hot because it's like knitted almost. I don't know. It's not like listed as a Wednesday Addams dress, but it definitely is a Wednesday Addams dress. So it's very hot. So hopefully I don't overheat because I'm very, very warm, but let's just jump on into the intro. So as per usual, I have my wicked candle in here. It smells like caramel apple, and I don't really have anything else to ramble about today. So let's just jump on into the stories. So I have a shit ton of DMs to go through, and I have a few emails to go through. So let's go to my DMs first and see what's going on there, because I think I have like 14 DMs to read. That's not even including the ones that I've already pre-read. So I'm not going to say names as per usual. I'm just going to say they're from Instagram and we'll go from there. They say, "Hello, I've been binge watching your videos since the start of October and I really love your vibe and your scary story videos are entertaining to watch. I don't want my username to be known if that's okay, but I can be addressed as Jay. I have a lot of paranormal stories growing up since I used to live in a haunted house. I have many stories there from myself and from my family, and here's one of the freakiest encounters I've ever had. This experience happened back in 2018, where me and my family, as well as my aunt and cousins, lived in my childhood home. It's a one-story house with 2 rooms, with the second one being on the back, made out of wood, while the rest is made of concrete. It was around near midnight, or exactly at midnight, when this happened. I was woken up by a loud voice of people laughing, talking, and singing. I know that some people would often hear voices upon waking up, and it would usually go away after a few minutes. Well, mine didn't. I was wide awake, and at this point, the voices were still there. They got even louder. I listened more closely to what they were talking about, since I'm kind of nosy like that. The more I listened, the more I got freaked out. They weren't talking or even singing in Filipino. I don't know what language they were talking in. They weren't any languages I was familiar with. I know there are many different Filipino languages. I heard them, and they aren't even close to what I've heard. It sounded like they were surrounding the house. I was so freaked out that I wanted to wake my mom up, who was sleeping soundly beside me, but decided not to. I didn't want to get scolded. I tried to sleep after that, and thankfully, I did. The next morning, when we were all sat around the dining table and had breakfast, I asked my cousin if they had heard voices last night, since they're night owls. They looked at me confused and said they hadn't. My aunt overheard our conversation and looked at me with wide eyes. "You heard them too?" she asked me, and I got chills at this point because I was freaking out. I was overjoyed by the fact that I wasn't the only one who heard it and knew I wasn't going insane. We talked about it for a while, even told my mom about it, but she just dismissed it. She said that they weren't talking in Filipino either. Before anyone says that it might be one of our neighbors being noisy, let me tell you that I know them pretty well. They had their usual karaoke night on somewhere around noon or afternoon until about 10. They wouldn't extend any further. If they would, somebody would have thrown rocks at the roofs until they piped down, but my aunt said their voices were still being heard until around 1 a.m. So she just heard a bunch of voices in her house and laughing and singing, and it wasn't in a language that she heard at all, and her aunt heard it too. So she wasn't the only one that heard it, so it wasn't like a dream or anything. That's so scary. Thank you so much for sending in your story. That is terrifying, and oh my God. So the next one I'm gonna read is another one from Instagram, and they say, "A few days ago, I was hanging out with a group of my friends, and we were just hanging out and talking. We eventually got bored of just talking. I am diagnosed with ADHD and I have a short attention span, so we decided we were going to go do something a little bit more exciting. Me, being stupid and irresponsible, I suggested we go ghost hunting. For a little backstory, we live on campus that used to be a World War II military base and is commonly known for its paranormal happenings in different areas on campus. But the campus bridge was known to have a more aggressive entity. So my friends agreed. We were getting our stuff needed, including a Ouija board, which was stupid. So we started to talk to what we thought was just one spirit, and then we soon learned that we were talking to at least 1 demon and 3 ghosts. We learned the names of the beings. The names consisted of Amon, Greg, Ruby, Peggy, and Richard. After we learned their names, they went on to say, "Don't be scared, at least not yet." This infuriated me. I then challenged them, yelling at the Ouija board saying, "You don't scare me, there's nothing you can do to hurt me." Amon replied, "You should run." That's when the planchette moved so quickly our hands couldn't keep up with what was happening. Without anyone touching it, it started to count down from 9 to 0. But before it reached 0, I quickly grabbed the planchette and moved it over to goodbye. This is when Richard took control of Jay. Jay was still possessed, ran to a spot pointing at a specific spot right under the bridge. Jay opened his mouth only to be able to make out one word in a voice that wasn't his own. Then suddenly, as he reached the point in which he was trying to reach, his aura changed. He started to growl, threatening all of us. It took 3 of us to get Jay away from the bridge. As soon as we got away from the bridge, he went back to normal, until we brought up certain topics, which would trigger Amon to take possession all over again. Later, I realized that 2 of my other friends, R and M, were possessed by Greg and Peggy. Greg had control of R and Peggy over M. I had only one effect from this instance, which was only overheating. That night, I kept burning up and having a fever, which went down quite a bit when I put my cross necklace my aunt gave me on. I really appreciate you reading my story. So that's a really crazy story that you had like 3 of your friends get possessed all at once just by using a Ouija board under a bridge. That's really terrifying. Oh my God. All I said was, oh my God, that's so scary. They didn't send anything else. Freaking awful. Oh my God. So I'm gonna move on to some of the Instagram stories that I haven't actually read yet. So if I haven't responded to you yet over Messenger, I'll respond later once I read your story, but I'm going to be reading ones that I haven't actually read yet. So I'm gonna start at the oldest one. Hello, I just wanted to apologize for any mistakes that I made while writing this. English isn't my first language and I'm still learning. So a little background information. Around 2014, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. At the time, I was 10, and my little cousin, who stayed with us quite often, was around 2 years old. She was in and out of the hospital a lot for a few years. Both of us had really close bond with her. In 2016, she passed away, and I was devastated. We didn't tell my cousin because at the time, she was too young to understand. We told her that she can't see her because she was in the hospital. Fast forward a few years later, my cousin, her parents and I were in the car driving to see my other family, and my cousin starts talking about some wizard. She explained how she sees the wizard who lets her talk to people in the sky. She turns to me and says, "I saw your mom. She's in the sky too. She's smiling at you." We were shocked. Her parents told her again that she was in the hospital, but she refused to believe it and continued on about how there were more people there, like my grandfather that she had never heard of before, and their neighbor who passed away a year prior. Her parents quickly told her not to talk about that so I wouldn't get upset. A few years later, I asked her if she still remembered that, and she said that the wizard was real and she talked to him. But now, when I ask her, she doesn't remember. My family says that she probably made it up, but to me, it's really creepy, and I kind of believe it. Oh my God, that's so creepy. So just like your cousin knew that your mom passed away and nobody had told her, and she got the information by just like a being talking to her that no one else can see and no one else can hear. That's fucking terrifying. Oh my God. Hi, I came across your channel recently, and let me say that I love your stories. I decided to share a few experiences that have happened to me and other family members. I'd like to mention that a lot of the women in my family experience paranormal events frequently and have told me countless stories of encounters they've had with ghosts. I don't know how many of them are true, but they're fun to listen to. The first story I'm going to tell takes place when my mom was a baby. Her and my grandma were staying at a family friend's house for a while, and they slept in the basement, which was basically a house in itself because it had a bed, a kitchen, bathroom, and a TV. They shared the bed most of the time since my mom was still a young child and would have rather slept with her mom. One night, my grandma woke up and my mom was crying and shaking her. At the end of the bed were 2 women, one very tall and bulky, and the other stubby and short. They seemed to be almost transparent, but their facial features were easy to make out. They also seemed to look right through my grandma and my mom. My grandma didn't move since she believed spirits couldn't hurt you, as she grabbed my mom's hand and told her to go back to sleep with the 2 women staring through them. My grandma said my mom sniffled and shook all night. Rightfully so, this was very scary for a toddler. When the sun was shining, they looked up and the 2 women were gone. They didn't tell their family friends, and my mom doesn't remember the incident. The next story is my own. It was the middle of August, and I had a friend over at my great-grandma's house. I live with my grandma, but my great-grandma's house is right next to hers. So I visited every day and have my own room over there. When my friend was over, we spent a little time in my room. The door was halfway open and facing the hallway. My friend, who we'll call Pink, was facing the door while I was not. Behind me, I felt someone run through the hall. When it happened, I immediately whipped my head around and stared at the door, where I caught a glimpse of a faint shadow running through the hall. My instant mindset was, oh, shit, is that real? But when I turned to face Pink, they almost looked panicked as they immediately asked, "Did you just see that?" My heart sank when I realized I might not have been hallucinating, and it could not be explained because my grandma was and is still suffering a foot infection, which causes her trouble in walking. There's no way she could have ran down the hallway like that, and there's no other kids in the house. My siblings weren't there, and lastly, there was no one in the room that we saw it go into. It was a very shallow experience, but the other things that I've experienced in that house, they have been so much worse, and this whole time I've been gaslighting myself into thinking I'm just imagining it. This leaves such a gray area of what have I been seeing all this time, and are the bad things I've been seeing in this house real? So they haven't sent any more stories, but that is absolutely terrifying. Oh my God, I haven't really seen a whole lot of shadow experiences or like things like run past me. Like out of the corner of my eye and my peripheral vision, definitely seen shadow people, but like it's just like flashes of light that you get and like no one else sees them. But like if you have an experience where two people in the same room have saw something, you definitely saw something and it wasn't just like your mind. That's terrifying. Oh my God. They said, hello, if you do decide to put this on one of your videos, I'm more than okay with you showing my user. Anyways, I've recently discovered your YouTube channel and I've been loving the stories you share. I also love how interactive you are with your viewers and try your best to get all their stories in, which inspired me to share my little paranormal story. It's not as intense as the others, but whatever. I also wanted to add, I'm not someone who experiences or have really experienced anything considered paranormal in my life, aside from this time. This happened around 2017, around 3 in the morning. I was laying on my couch in my living room watching a show. Everyone in my house was asleep at this time, so it was only me. Everything was pretty normal for the most part. I didn't feel unsafe or feel any off vibes. This is until I decided to glance at the window. The window was right next to the TV, and I'm not sure what exactly promoted me to look at it, but I did. And Jesus, fuck. What I saw scared the shit out of me. I literally froze in fear. When I looked at the window, I saw what appeared to be a dark figure with glowing blue eyes. It had to have been tall, given the height of the window. Because we have a basement, the window placement is higher up. I could only see maybe the neck and head. It felt so surreal. It wasn't just a quick trick of the eye. It stood there for maybe 2 seconds, staring, and ducked down a bit and ran off into the night. By the way it moved, it was so animated and real. I just laid on the couch frozen for what seemed like forever. Eventually, I got the courage to shoot up and run towards my parents' room. Telling them this, they didn't really consider it paranormal or anything, but thought it could be some creep trying to break into our house. So they took a look around the perimeters of the house and eventually saw nothing. That was the last and only time I saw that thing, but holy fuck, it was creepy. I don't know what it was. Oh my God, that's so terrifying. I would hate to look at my window. I'm so terrified to look at my window at night. It's like a phobia of mine. Like I'll go into my bathroom at night to go to the bathroom and just so fucking eerie to look out at sometimes. I'm always like, I'm gonna see fucking Slender Man and he's gonna steal me. Like it's terrifying. I hate looking outside at night. It just freaks me out. Oh my God. I don't know if you're still reading scary stories your viewers send, but I have one. When I was a kid, we had moved around a bit, and there's one house in particular that was really weird. I have a couple stories from it, so here's a few. My mom had the master bedroom, and the bathroom didn't have a door on it, so you could see the sink and mirror from her bed. One day, my mom was washing her hands, and she saw a big shadow figure watching her from the door. When she yelled, "What the fuck are you watching me, you creep?" and turned around, there was no one there. She said you could tell he was a man by how tall and the energy he gave off. Another one was on my 13th birthday, and I had my best friend over. She was spending the night, and her and I have done a lot of spooky stuff together. When it was bedtime, we went to my room and talked until we were both tired. At the time, I had a dachshund or a wiener dog, however you would know the dog breed by. Her name was Baby, and I would sleep with her in my arms, like you would a stuffed animal. Later in the night, I got woken up by my friend telling me to have my dog stop running around the room and ripping paper up. My dog was an older dog at that point and just laid around all day, and would walk around everywhere, not run. I sat up and told her to feel my dog laying with us. The ceiling fan light was right above my head, so I turned on my light and there was nothing there. But my cast iron cross I had on my dresser was on the floor and paper ripped up everywhere. And anyone who has had a cast iron anything knows it's heavy. How would it have fallen and I not woken up? And that's all they said. So they just had an experience in the room at night. Both her and her friend heard something ripping paper up and a dog running around. That's really creepy. Oh my God. So I'm going to move over to Reddit now and read one of the stories from Reddit that I read a couple of days ago. And it's really creepy and I'm really excited to read it to you guys. So this one is from the No Sleep section and the author is One Planch Man. And the story is titled, My Uncle Used to Be a Trawl Fisherman Until Something Unexplainable Happened. Back in the early 1990s, my uncle worked on board a commercial fishing vessel out of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I can't say that word, I'm sorry. It was a 95-foot trawler operated by 7-man crew and would take regular runs anywhere between a few days to a week out at sea. It was a dangerous job. The North Atlantic was cold and a cruel place. When you're 100 miles from shore in the middle of a storm, with waves battering the rusted hull of your boat, with the only protection from the fury of the sea, you really feel true isolation and terror. For those who aren't familiar, trawling is a fishing method which involves casting a net into the ocean and dragging it steadily through the water, picking up anything that gets caught. The net then would be pulled out of the water and the crew would sort out which fish to take to market and which to throw back. Oftentimes, other animals would inadvertently get caught in the net, such as dolphins, seabirds, small sharks, seals, and turtles. Those would be released back into the sea, but not without almost certainly being injured or unfortunately killed by the net. It pained my uncle to see these creatures like this, but he was young and had to put food on the table for his family. However, the ocean does not make it easy to do this kind of work. Commercial fishing is a risky endeavor. It wasn't uncommon for entire crews to die out at sea. That was a possibility that weighed on my uncle's mind every time a storm was brewing while he was at sea. One such trip finally made him quit, and to this day, the memory of his former friend and crew member still haunts him. It was supposed to be a short 3-day trip to bottom trawl for halibut. Being the dead of winter, the crew did not want to be exposed to the unpredictable weather for too long. This trip started as a brisk but sunny morning, but as the day went on, dark storm clouds gathered and stayed in the region for the entire duration. Out there, scattered showers pelted the crew and towering waves rammed and tossed their boat. The cold and the wet chilled their fingers to the bone, making a difficult job even harder. Then they began to notice barnacles spreading across the hull, starting at the bow. They were few at first, staying well below the waterline, but as the day progressed, more and more appeared, growing unusually fast. Their captain, Mateo, was puzzled, for the crew had recently removed all of the barnacles before even heading out. How could they return so quickly? That was an issue that was much lower on their list of priorities. They chose to ignore it for the time being. The first night, while my uncle was enjoying his 4 hours of sleep, he had an unusual dream. One where he was standing at the bottom of the ocean, looking up at the surface above him. Though he was underwater, he was breathing fine. The light above him was a pale pink-purple hue, shifting and pulsing with the flow of the water. All around, the carcasses of fish, squid, whales, and other sea creatures rained down in slow motion, leaving trails of bubbles in their way. Then the sea grew darker, enveloping him in a shroud of complete blackness. With it came a long, deep rumble in the distance, which caused his entire body to vibrate. The light coming through from the surface faded, and right when his last inkling disappeared, he woke up. In the morning, he casually mentioned his unusual dream to the others, thinking nothing of it. But when they heard his story, their faces went pale, as they reluctantly admitted that they too had experienced similar dreams. Though not exactly like my uncle's, they each saw their own version of it. Lancaster, the fisherman, whom my uncle was closest with, said that in the dream, instead of standing at the ocean floor, he was hovering above with hundreds, even thousands of feet of the water above or below him. He couldn't even tell that there was a floor to begin with. Then as the darkness closed in around him and the grinding, blowing noise came, he looked down. Slowly the ground opened up, a yellow glow emanating from the newly formed fissure. As the fissure grew wider and wider, he suddenly realized what he was looking at was an enormous eye. Despite this, Lancaster and the others, began the tough-as-nails, blue-collar men they were, did not let their demeanor falter in front of each other. They brushed the dreams off and stayed focused on their work ahead. They still had several tons of fish to catch and a fat payout to chase. Lancaster, however, was especially quiet after that. That day, they were out at the mercy of the waves, which came with a lot more aggression than before. Some were nearly 10 feet tall and hammered the deck, soaking the men in freezing cold water. The barnacles had grown even more, and by now, they were beginning to increase drag on the vessel. It was when the crew approached the continental shelf that things would take a turn for the worse. Right before the drop-off, the crew lowered the drag arms and tossed the trawl nets down. Cruising at a steady 3 knots to drag, the nets at the bottom of the ocean all went well at first, until the starboard net had suddenly been caught. This was not usually a concern, but as hard as the crew tried, they could not pull it free. And the sonar, they saw a large, indistinct shape in the water, right behind their trawl. The outline was pretty hazy. They couldn't determine what exactly the shape was. At first, they thought it was a shoal of fish, but that didn't explain what kept their net from moving. As they watched, the shape grew larger and larger. Mateo scoffed that the transducer must have been malfunctioning. They tried to reel the net in, hoping to cut their losses before it took too much damage, but the winch wouldn't budge. Whatever was holding the net in place was too strong to pull the winch up. By now, the engine was straining, and the stronger they pulled, the more the boat's starboard side was pulled down, tripping it dangerously into the water. Black smoke billowed from the exhaust, and the engine began to shut down. In all the chaos, my uncle looked over at Lancaster and noticed he had completely blanked out. At first, my uncle thought he was frozen in fear, but that didn't make sense because Lancaster had more experience than him and was no stranger to high-intensity situations like this. He remembered how shocked Lancaster was in the morning and realized something must have gotten to him, but this was no time to talk. My uncle grabbed him and had him assist in hand-pumping diesel fuel into the engine until they could get the air out of the line. If the engine failed, they would be stranded at sea. Whatever it was that had a hold on the trawl net, it was unfathomably strong. Then after struggling for what felt like forever, the net finally came free and the men were able to reel it in. On the sonar, the shape quickly withdrew, as it was just an anomaly on the screen. They managed to revive the engine and sped away from the area, not wanting to stick around any longer. The drag arms brought the net up onto the deck, and the men quickly sorted through their fresh catch. Immediately, they realized among the creatures they had dragged up was an enormous oarfish, an absolute monster from the deep. It looked to be about 30 feet long. Though it was dead, the body was still fresh, meaning it couldn't have died too long ago. One crew member, Isaac, wondered if that was what had caught on the net, but the idea was quickly dismissed because there was no way an animal could have done that, and that thing detected on the sonar was much bigger. Still, the men were puzzled by their very unusual find. Oarfish typically lived in depths of about 1,000 meters and would only come to the surface if they were sick or dying. On rare instances, they were caught by fishermen and their carcasses would wash ashore. Another crew member, Ortega, warned that oarfish were bad omens and that they should throw it back as quickly as possible. The others, including my uncle, objected the idea and reassured Ortega that everything would be fine. They decided to keep the oarfish as a memento. After putting all of their catch on ice in the hold down below, they put the oarfish on a hook and hung the carcass from one of their drag arms. Looping their course back to shore, my uncle realized that Lancaster had been silent the entire time. He was constantly taking nervous glances at the oarfish. My uncle asked him what was wrong, but Lancaster didn't know. He just felt that there was something off about the carcass, a looming sense of dread that he couldn't explain. "We really should just throw it back," he finally said. The two were working together as the other slept. Lancaster had grown increasingly distant, barely responding to my uncle, and when he did, he merely gave quick one-word answers. Multiple times, my uncle caught him leaning against the railing, staring off into the inky blackness of the ocean. In one final instance, his head stuck out so far that it looked like one bad wave could send him overboard. My uncle had to stop him. He grabbed Lancaster by his shoulders and demanded, "What has gotten into you?" Lancaster, unfazed by the jolt he had just received, asked in a calm monotone, "Do you see it?" "See what?" my uncle replied. Lancaster's behavior made him finally admit that there was something deeply wrong with his friend. Maybe the sea was finally getting to him. Or was it something worse? He struggled to stop his mind from tumbling down the slopes of possibilities he didn't want to go. Lancaster simply continued staring, his gaze as empty as the endless void below, as if to say that his silence was the answer. My uncle felt a chill run down his spine. He let go, afraid and unsure of what to do. "Sit tight," he said. The air is freezing cold and had been the entire trip, but he did not feel it biting into him until this very moment. "I'm gonna go get Mateo, okay?" Lancaster didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to face the sea again. My uncle rushed below deck to wake the captain, who was a bit grumpy at first for being interrupted from what little sleep he had had, but obliged to go up and help. Stepping out of the cabin, they stopped. Lancaster was gone, and all that met them was the wet, limp body of the oarfish swaying back and forth with the gentle rocking of the vessel. Its silvery scales reflected hauntedly in the pale yellow deck light. Along its body was a massive gash, revealing its hollowed out insides completely void of internal organs, like an empty, discarded husk. They woke the rest of the crew, and soon all 6 men were desperately searching for Lancaster. They searched the entire vessel and shined their lights into the water in case he had gone overboard. Mateo swung the boat around, frantically scanning the water for any sign of him. Taking a closer look at the oarfish, their stomachs dropped when they realized it didn't look like something or someone had cut it open and gutted the carcass. It looked like something inside had torn its way out. Not taking any more chances, the crew cut the oarfish loose and tossed it overboard to be reclaimed by the sea. Following the disappearance of Lancaster, the Coast Guard led a massive search effort to find him. Sadly, they had to admit that judging by the conditions of the sea at that time of the year, he would have died very quickly from hypothermia, shortly after entering the water. After that, scavenging marine life would have picked the body apart. The body. Their only hope was to recover any human remains they could, any trace of him to bring back to his family. Sadly, nothing was ever found. My uncle expressed his condolences to the Lancaster family, and to this day, he deeply regrets leaving his friend all alone on that cold night. And that's how the end of the story. So that one's not really so much paranormal as it's just like super fucking weird. Like something tore its way out of the oarfish and his friend was acting really, really strange after the dream and looking into the water and just feeling all around off. It was almost like his friend wasn't like his friend anymore. It was like he was possessed by something. Super fucking creepy. Thank you so much for letting me read your story. This is where I'm going to stop the video today though. The cars are driving me absolutely insane. I've had to stop filming like 100 fucking times because they won't stop going by and they're so fucking loud. My camera overheated once, so I already had to put it in the fridge once to cool it down so I could finish the story. And this has just been too much today. I need to find a better time to film when the cars aren't constantly going by, because I know it's irritating for you guys to hear me constantly bitch about it, but it's so irritating for me to constantly hear them rev their fucking engines past my house, and I lose my train of thought when I'm reading the story. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you guys did enjoy this video, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below for more content like this, and I will see you guys at the next video. Bye!